You see this nice quiet life I have now? The calm, the simplicity. It's a very deliberate thing. It's what you build for yourself after a hurricane has passed through your family and ripped the foundation right out from under you. If you had told me 5 years ago that I, Clara Hayes, a woman who dedicated her entire life to her husband and 2 children, would be sitting across from them in a courtroom being sued by them, I would have laughed. I would have felt insulted. But here we are. This is the story of how my own flesh and blood tried to take everything from me, and how a simple piece of paper, a last will and testament, became the deadliest weapon in our family's history. My husband, Arthur, was a good man, a brilliant architect, a quiet provider, and honestly, the anchor of my life for 35 years. He passed away suddenly, a heart attack that gave us no time for goodbyes, no warning, just silence. The silence he left behind in our big, beautiful house was deafening. My children, Emily and Daniel, were my immediate comfort. They were grown, established, but still my babies. Emily, 41, a successful lawyer herself, ironically. Daniel, 38, a good-natured guy, a teacher, married with 2 young kids. They flew in immediately. We cried, we held each other, we promised to get through it together. The funeral was beautiful, a true tribute to the man Arthur was. It was right after the funeral on a damp Tuesday morning that the nice part of our family story ended and the nightmare began. Arthur had always been meticulous about his finances. He was old school. His will was not some vague verbal promise. It was a physical document, locked away in his home safe, updated just a year before he died. He told me what was in it years ago, but going through it now felt like reading the final chapter of our life together. When Mr. Harrison, Arthur's solicitor, came over, we all gathered in the living room, me, Emily, and Daniel. There was a solemn, respectful silence as Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and opened the official envelope. Arthur's estate was substantial. He had built up a successful firm, and our assets included the family home, a rental property, a significant portfolio of investments, and various savings accounts. The core of the will, the part that was supposed to be simple and routine, read, "I give, devise, and bequeath all of my real and personal property, including but not limited to the family residence at 45 Oak Street, all investment accounts, and the remainder of my estate, to my beloved wife, Clara Hayes, outright." I have full faith that my wife Clara will provide for our children, Emily Hayes and Daniel Hayes, as she sees fit, both during her lifetime and through her own subsequent estate planning. It was clear, everything to me. I looked up, expecting my children to nod in understanding. After all, this was standard for a long marriage. The surviving spouse inherits, ensuring their financial security, and then they, in turn, plan for the next generation. We had discussed this as a family before, but the silence that followed was not respectful. It was thick, heavy, and venomous. Emily, my lawyer daughter, was the first to speak. Her face was tight, the kind of expression she used when grilling a witness. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Could you reread the part about the beneficiaries?" I believe I misheard the allocation. Mr. Harrison, sensing the shift in the air, repeated the key lines, his voice slightly more tentative this time. "To my beloved wife, Clara Hayes, outright." Daniel shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, running a hand through his hair. "Outright. Meaning 100%? I stared at them, confused. "Yes, Daniel." Your father and I always agreed. I manage the assets, and you two will, of course, inherit everything after I'm gone." That was the plan. Emily leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "Mom, with all due respect, that's not what we understood the plan to be. Dad was a fair man. He always talked about setting us up. We assumed the investments, or at least the rental property, would be divided immediately." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Setting you up? Emily, you're a senior partner at a major law firm. Daniel, you and Sarah bought your own house. You are set up. Your father was primarily concerned with my security. You know the cost of living. You know the taxes. He made sure I wouldn't have to worry about selling our home." The conversation quickly devolved from a respectful inquiry to a thinly veiled accusation. Emily started to question the fairness of the will. Daniel, quieter, kept mumbling about how tight things were with 2 kids in private school. They were acting like I was a stranger who had swooped in to claim Arthur's wealth, not their mother, who had been his partner in building it. "Mom," Emily finally said, standing up, the lawyer persona fully taking over. "This just doesn't sound like Dad's intent." He was a detail man. If he wanted you to have everything, he would have made sure there was a clear, documented trust for us, or at least some kind of side agreement. The way it's written, it leaves us completely vulnerable to you." "Vulnerable to me?" The statement stung more than any accusation about money. "Vulnerable to me, Emily? Your own mother?" I whispered. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," she said, her eyes hard, "that we need to look into the execution of this document. It's possible there was undue influence, or maybe, just maybe, Dad wanted us to have an immediate, substantial inheritance, and this document doesn't reflect his true wishes." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Hayes, the will is legally sound. Mr. Hayes signed it in my office with 2 witnesses, following all legal procedures." "Procedures can be flawed," Emily shot back, her voice rising. "Mom, I'm being direct. I am asking you to voluntarily redistribute the assets now. 1/3 to Daniel, 1/3 to me. And you keep the last third, including the house, free and clear." My jaw dropped. 1/3? They wanted me to sell off the portfolio, pay the immediate taxes, and then live on what was left, having just lost my husband? "No," I said, the word barely a breath. "Absolutely not. Your father's wishes are clear. You will inherit when I die. Until then, the estate stays intact for my security." That single no was the declaration of war. That day, my grieving children turned into my legal adversaries. They didn't leave with a hug. They left with a threat. Within 2 weeks, I received the official notice. Hayes versus Hayes. My children were suing me, their mother, to contest their father's will, claiming I had exerted undue influence over him in his final year, essentially arguing that I had manipulated Arthur into disinheriting them immediately. The accusation was shocking. It was a lie. But in court, a lie is only as strong as the evidence against it. And my children, fueled by a dangerous mix of greed and a perceived slight, were preparing to use every legal loophole they knew to break their father's last promise to me. I realized then that this wasn't about money. It was about power and control. And the fight for both had just begun. The lawsuit landed on my doorstep like a block of ice. Hayes versus Hayes. It wasn't just the formality of it, it was the chilling language, undue influence. The phrase implies manipulation, coercion, that I, Clara, had somehow preyed on my late husband's vulnerability to steer his financial decisions selfishly. The pain of losing Arthur was instantly compounded by the betrayal of my children. I felt like I was wearing a scarlet letter. How could they, knowing the 35 years of partnership Arthur and I shared, suggest I was a schemer? Did they really think I sat beside his deathbed whispering, "Don't leave them anything, Arthur, leave it all to me"? He died suddenly on the golf course, for goodness sake. There was no final manipulation, just a final devastating silence. I called Mr. Harrison immediately. He was sympathetic but professional. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I told them the will is ironclad. But your daughter is a fierce lawyer, and she's leveraging a technicality. They're claiming Arthur's mental capacity was compromised when he signed the revision a year ago, linking it to the subtle onset of his heart issues." "That's outrageous," I cried. "He was sharper than both of them combined. He was running his firm." "Legally, outrage doesn't matter, Clara. Evidence does. The court wants to see why Arthur made this decision, leaving everything solely to you instead of a standard split trust. Emily and Daniel are going to argue that Arthur's true intent was to provide for his children immediately, and that you somehow prevented him from doing that. I had to hire my own litigator, not just a will expert, but a courtroom brawler. It cost a fortune before the first hearing, adding financial anxiety to my emotional turmoil. My lawyer, a stern but effective woman named Mrs. Petrov, was blunt. "They are arguing that you marginalize them financially. We need to show the court that this was Arthur's independent, well-reasoned decision based on a prior family agreement." The most painful part was the complete communication breakdown. Emily and Daniel stopped returning my calls. They communicated only through their legal team. My own grandchildren, whom I adored, were suddenly off limits. Daniel's wife, Sarah, used to call me every Sunday. Now, nothing. I'd text them, "I miss you," and get back a curt, "Please direct all communication through our counsel." The silence of my children was more painful than the silence of the grave. The first mediation session was a disaster. It was the first time I saw them face to face since the will reading. The air in that conference room was toxic. Emily and Daniel sat on one side of the large table. Their lawyer flanked beside them. I sat opposite, with Mrs. Petrov. Emily didn't look at me. She addressed her lawyer, who addressed mine. It was dehumanizing. Their opening offer was simple. They would drop the lawsuit if I signed a new document immediately distributing 50% of the non-house assets, investments, accounts, rental property, between them, and establishing a binding trust that guaranteed them the remaining 50% upon my death, regardless of any future changes I might make to my own will. Mrs. Petrov leaned over and whispered, "Don't agree to anything, Clara. They're trying to bully you out of half your security." I ignored her for a second and looked straight at Emily. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking, "why are you doing this?" "We are family." She finally looked up, her face etched with cold determination. "We are protecting ourselves, Mom. You have everything. We watched Dad work his entire life, and we deserve our share of his legacy now. Not 20 years from now, when you've maybe remarried or your circumstances have changed." The implied accusation that I was already planning to move on and forget them was the final straw. "I won't be bullied by my own children," I stated clearly, pushing back from the table. "Your father left this to me. He trusted me, and I will honor his trust. See you in court." The preparation for the trial became my full-time job. Mrs. Petrov needed evidence. Did I manage Arthur's business? Did I isolate him from the children? Did I handle his medical care? The sheer depth of the intrusion into my private life was exhausting. The most shocking moment came when Daniel's deposition transcript arrived. Daniel, my sweet, quiet son, was actively participating in this assault. He claimed, under oath, that Arthur had felt pressured by me to keep the money structure simple for tax purposes, often muttering, "Clara just doesn't want the hassle of multiple accounts." He twisted normal, benign conversations into evidence of my financial control. But the real gut punch was the email. Emily produced an email from me, sent to Arthur 2 years ago, right after a particularly tough holiday visit where both children had been complaining about their debt. The email was me, venting to Arthur. The relevant part they highlighted read, "Arthur, I love them, but sometimes I feel like they only call when they need a handout. Let's make sure when we update the will, we are crystal clear. We need security for U.S. They are grown. I don't want them breaking down our door the minute you're gone, demanding their cut. They need to learn financial independence." Emily's team argued this email was the smoking gun, proof of my intent to marginalize the children and my direct influence on the will's structure. I sank into my chair when I read it. It was a private vent, a moment of frustration twisted into a malicious legal argument. They had dug through Arthur's private emails to find a vulnerable moment and weaponize it against me. The feeling wasn't anger. It was a profound, suffocating sorrow. My children were not just suing me, they were dismantling the private narrative of our marriage and using the pieces to destroy me. The trial date was set. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was a war for my reputation, my sanity, and the honor of my late husband's intentions. I was ready to fight. The courtroom was precisely how you'd imagine it, cold, wood-paneled, and suffocatingly formal. But for me, it felt like a surgical theater where my family's history was being dissected in public. Arthur's will, a document meant to provide peace, was now the central exhibit in a display of familial avarice. Emily sat at the plaintiff's table, looking every bit the professional, ruthless lawyer she was. Her composure, her calculated indifference to my presence, was a performance of betrayal. Daniel, looking drawn and uncomfortable, mostly kept his eyes on the floor. I wondered if he felt any shame at all, or if the lure of immediate wealth had completely clouded his moral judgment. Their side presented their case first. Emily's lawyer, a slick, condescending man named Mr. Peterson, started by painting a picture of Arthur as a man whose final year was marked by declining health and cognitive weakness. It was a vicious lie. He used selective snippets from Arthur's medical records, a prescription for a mild anti-anxiety drug, a single comment about forgetting keys, to build a scaffolding of vulnerability. Then came the centerpiece of their argument, my private email. Mr. Peterson read the excerpt aloud, the one about them calling only for handouts and my desire for Arthur to be crystal clear about his intentions. He projected it onto a screen for the entire court to see. "Mrs. Hayes, isn't it true that you sent this email to your husband less than a year before the will revision, demonstrating your clear and documented hostility towards your children receiving any immediate financial benefit from your husband's estate?" he asked, his voice dripping with insinuation. My lawyer, Mrs. Petrov, stood up quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is mischaracterizing a private emotional exchange between spouses. Sustained," the judge ruled, but the damage was done. The implication hung heavy in the air. When it was my turn to take the stand, the tension was unbearable. I was dressed soberly, trying to project the image of a grieving widow, not a greedy schemer. Mr. Peterson's cross-examination was brutal. He didn't ask about Arthur's capacity, he asked about my spending. "Mrs. Hayes, can you confirm that immediately after your husband's passing, you transferred a significant sum from a joint savings account into a private exclusive account in your name only?" "Yes," I answered steadily. "It was necessary to pay the immediate taxes and estate fees, as well as the funeral costs. And it was a joint account, therefore legally mine." "But you didn't share the details of this account with your children, did you?" "They never asked. They only communicated through their lawyers." He then moved on to the core issue, the family dynamic. "Mrs. Hayes, wasn't the relationship between your husband and your children strained in his final years because he consistently refused to help them financially, and didn't you encourage that refusal?" This was where I fought back. I looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, that is not true. My husband supported our children throughout their lives. He paid for their college, their first cars, and helped with the down payments on their homes. But Arthur was a firm believer in self-reliance. He told both Emily and Daniel repeatedly, 'I will ensure your mother is comfortable first. You are adults. You must stand on your own 2 feet.' That was his belief, not mine, and I respected his wishes. But the biggest punch came when Daniel took the stand. Daniel, my son. He looked absolutely miserable, but his testimony was calculated and devastating. He tearfully recounted a family holiday dinner where Arthur had allegedly promised him money for his children's education, only for me to step in the next day and tell Arthur that Daniel was perfectly capable of financing his own family. My mother always positioned herself as the gatekeeper to Dad's money, Daniel stated, his voice cracking. It felt like every decision Dad made about money had to pass the mom test. And the truth is, when he revised the will, he was already slowing down. He trusted her completely, and I believe she used that trust to influence him to write us out of the immediate inheritance so she could have total control. That lie, that specific painful fabrication about me being a gatekeeper, was the moment I realized they weren't just pursuing money. They were rewriting history to justify their actions. The look in Daniel's eyes wasn't just sadness. It was a desperate plea for the judge to believe his narrative. During the break, I followed him to the hallway. "Daniel," I whispered, grabbing his arm, "look at me. Look at what you're doing. You are lying under oath to destroy your mother. What promise did Arthur make about the education fund? Tell me the truth." He pulled his arm away, avoiding my gaze. "I told the truth, Mom. Just drop the lawsuit. Give us the split. We can be a family again." "You are not offering to be a family again, Daniel. You are demanding a ransom, and I will not pay it. I will stand here and defend your father's final wishes until I have nothing left." The confrontation was brief, but it cemented my resolve. This was no longer about Arthur's will. It was about defining the truth of our family, and I could not let them win a false narrative built on greed and lies. The trial was only heating up, and I knew the worst was yet to come. I had to find a way to prove that Arthur's decision wasn't coerced, but came from a deeper, forgotten place in our past. The weight of the courtroom testimony was crushing me. Every lie my children told, every misrepresentation of Arthur's character, felt like a physical blow. Mrs. Petrov was doing her best, meticulously cross-examining their vague claims. But undue influence is a cloud difficult to disperse. You can't prove what didn't happen. I was losing hope. The judge looked increasingly skeptical of Arthur's unilateral decision. Why hadn't Arthur established a trust or allocated a fraction of the estate immediately? It was financially sound, yes, but emotionally it seemed harsh, and that was what Emily and Daniel were leveraging. They were portraying me as the heartless one who had convinced a weakening man to favor her over his own children. One evening, after another grueling day of legal back and forth, I sat alone in Arthur's old study. I hadn't changed anything since he died. The scent of old paper and leather still lingered. I was looking through his desk, not for a legal document. Mr. Harrison had already cleared those out, but for a memory, a piece of Arthur that hadn't been weaponized. I picked up an old leather-bound journal. Arthur hadn't been a diarist. This was mostly sketches and notes from his early architectural projects. But tucked deep inside, pressed flat against the spine of the book, was a folded, yellowed sheet of paper. It wasn't a will or a legal amendment. It was a personal, handwritten letter, addressed simply to my dearest Clara. My hands shook as I unfolded it. It was dated 12 years ago, long before Arthur's health concerns, long before the last will revision, and significantly, right around the time Daniel and Emily, then young adults, had both experienced severe financial crises that Arthur had bailed them out of. I began to read, "My dearest Clara, today, I finalized the transfer of funds for Daniel's second business loan, and just 6 months ago, we helped Emily with that enormous tax bill. Our children are smart, capable people, but they are both fundamentally impulsive when it comes to money. They rely on the safety net we provide, and they see our assets not as security for our future, but as a readily available source of immediate rescue. I've been thinking a lot about the legacy we are building. The greatest gift we can give them now is not more money, but the space and the necessity to become truly independent. If we make immediate allocations upon my death, I fear they will squander the capital on short-term needs, new cars, unnecessary expansion, perhaps even poor investment advice, and then be left with nothing substantial, having gained no financial maturity. This is why I need to be clear with the will structure. I am leaving everything to you outright. This is not because I love them less, but because I love you and I trust you absolutely. I trust you to manage the estate prudently, and more importantly, I trust you to hold the line. By keeping the entirety of the estate secure until your passing, we ensure that they must build their own financial foundation now. They will receive their inheritance when they are older, wiser, and hopefully less reliant on a handout. I want you to be secure, and I want them to be stable. This is the only way to achieve both. If they ever challenge this, know that this decision was made with a clear mind and a heavy heart, purely for the long-term benefit of our children's maturity. Yours forever, Arthur." Tears streamed down my face. It wasn't the relief that washed over me. It was the profound confirmation of Arthur's genuine, if tough, love. The letter wasn't legal, but it was the intent. It was the clear, documented proof that Arthur's decision was not influenced by me in his final years, but was a long-standing, well-reasoned choice based on his children's established history of financial irresponsibility. I drove straight to Mrs. Petrov's office, clutching the letter. She read it once, then twice, her stern face breaking into the first genuine smile I'd seen on her. "Clara," she said, her voice sharp with excitement, "this is it. This is Arthur's mind. This confirms his independent intent. It directly refutes the undue influence claim, showing he was worried about their financial maturity years before his health declined." The next morning, Mrs. Petrov called Arthur's former firm manager and several of his golf partners to the stand. She had them testify about Arthur's unwavering belief in tough love when it came to his adult children's finances and his fear that they would eat the principal. The stage was set. Then she stood before the judge and requested the introduction of a new piece of non-testamentary evidence, the letter. Emily's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, fought it fiercely, arguing it was irrelevant hearsay from 12 years prior. But Mrs. Petrov countered brilliantly. "Your Honor, the entire case rests on the intent of the testator, Mr. Hayes. The plaintiffs claim the defendant, their mother, coerced him in his final year. This letter, written 12 years ago, proves his intent regarding the children's immediate inheritance was long held, independent, and based on their own documented spending patterns. It is central to understanding the will's structure." The judge agreed to admit the letter into evidence. Mr. Peterson, shaken, immediately requested an emergency recess. The dynamic had completely shifted. They had built their case on a fabricated timeline of my manipulation, and Arthur's own words had just dismantled it. As I left the courtroom, I saw Daniel and Emily huddled with their lawyer. Emily's face was white with shock and fury. Daniel, however, finally looked up. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, I saw not the hardness of a litigant, but the flicker of a scared little boy who knew he had been caught in a deeply dishonest and cruel act. The inheritance trap they set for me had snapped shut on them instead. The handwritten letter changed everything. Mr. Peterson, Emily's lawyer, returned from the recess deflated. The confident swagger was gone. Arthur's words, his clear explanation that his children's financial impulsiveness was the very reason he gave the estate to me outright, had neutralized their undue influence claim instantly. You can't claim a decision was coerced in 2023 when the stated rationale was meticulously documented in 2011. The remaining proceedings were short and anticlimactic. The judge didn't need extensive closing arguments. The evidence of Arthur's long-standing intent, combined with the fact that the will was legally executed and witnessed, was overwhelming. The judgment came down 3 days later. The court found decisively in my favor. The will was upheld in its entirety. Arthur's final wishes, to leave all assets to his wife, Clara Hayes, with the explicit trust that she would provide for their children later, were deemed valid, independent, and clear. When the judge announced the verdict, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't the elation of victory. It was the hollow realization that winning a lawsuit against your own children is the most profound kind of loss. As we were gathering our things, I looked over at Emily and Daniel. Emily was rigid, furiously whispering to her counsel, already planning the appeal. She hadn't learned a single thing. Daniel, however, pushed past his sister and approached me. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes were red, not from losing the case, but from a quiet shame I hadn't seen before. "Mom," he began, his voice barely a rasp, I'm sorry." The apology wasn't perfect. It wasn't a full admission of the malicious intent, but it was a start. He looked truly broken, crushed by the realization that his greed had not only failed, but had exposed the painful truth of his father's intentions regarding his maturity. "Arthur did this because he loved you, Daniel," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "He wanted you to stand on your own. He wanted you to stop running to us every time things got tough. This was his last difficult lesson." He nodded, tears welling up. "I know. I saw the letter. I should have trusted you. We should have waited." But then Emily, ever the lawyer, swooped in and dragged him away. "Don't you dare talk to her, Daniel. We appeal. We have grounds for procedural errors." I watched them leave, two figures consumed by the pursuit of money, separated from me by an invisible wall of bitterness and misplaced ambition. Daniel's moment of reckoning had been hijacked by his sister's relentless need to control and win. Mrs. Petrov, satisfied, congratulated me. "You won, Clara. Your future is secure." Arthur's trust was upheld. "Thank you, Mrs. Petrov," I replied, but the word tasted like ash. I had secured my future, but I had lost my family. In the months that followed, life settled back into a fragile routine. Emily never apologized. The relationship remains irreparably fractured. She sees me as a legal rival who thwarted her, not as her mother. Daniel tries occasionally. He sends a strained text on my birthday or a picture of the grandchildren. I still haven't seen them in person. The bridge of communication is weak, held up only by his fragile regret and my enduring, desperate hope. I followed through on the only promise that mattered to me, honoring Arthur's intent. I established the trusts for Emily and Daniel exactly as Arthur would have wanted. They are irrevocable, carefully managed, and they guarantee that the children will receive substantial, secure inheritance upon my death. The difference is, now they know the money is coming from my hand, on my timeline, just as Arthur intended. The experience taught me that money doesn't just corrupt, it reveals. It ripped the mask off the adult lives of my children and exposed a deep-seated sense of entitlement that I hadn't realized we, Arthur and I, had inadvertently fostered. I am financially secure now. I live in the home Arthur and I built. But the silence in this house is different now. It is no longer the silence of grief. It is the silence of loneliness. And every time I look at Arthur's portrait, I know I kept my promise to him. I defended his trust. But I also know the terrible final cost of that defense. The price of upholding my husband's will was the loss of my peace, and tragically, the permanent fracturing of my relationship with the very children he was trying to protect. That truly was the final brutal inheritance trap. Thank you for listening to this difficult confession. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments section below.